All right, we'll get started in a couple minutes. If you want to go ahead and please feel free to introduce yourself, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, if you want to, in the comments field, go ahead, just say hello, tell us where you're from. That'd be great. We usually kind of do these as a Q&A session, but we're going to be going over mostly the new features found in Cubase Pro 9.5, the version that was just released last week. So we'll just kind of go through most of the new features. So it'll be a slightly different format, but we'll get through that. So it might be a little shorter, maybe just about an hour or so, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how long we go. All right, so people from all over the UK, Brazil, Switzerland, New Jersey. And can you guys hear me okay? Good to see you, Mark. I'm glad you could join us, as the world famous Mark Ludmer. Okay, so we'll wait just a couple more minutes getting people logged in. Good to see you, Nick. All right, we have Jacksonville, Florida. We have India. It's wonderful. All right, we have Sweden. All right, Italy, Uruguay. Romania, Colombia, London, Sacramento, Bosnia. It's fascinating. All right. It's always a thrill to me to see people from all over the world. I get to travel vicariously. Alaska. All right. I'm not sure if we've had anyone live from Alaska before, but it's great. All right, we have Toronto, Mexico. Okay, so just a quick question kind of came up is what's the difference between a pre and post insert? That really just determines in the signal flow if it's the insert is pre-fader or the insert is after the fader in the signal flow. But we'll go over that a bit. All right, so someone else from Romania, Israel, Germany. All right, Virgin Islands, St. Louis. I see a question, does Cubase have pre-fader metering? So before we get started with that, if you just right click and you could actually go down to your meter, global meter settings, and then you could change the meter position here to input. So you have input, post fader, post panner for different meter settings. All right, let some people get logged in. right, so we have New York City, Greece. Okay. I see question, is it possible to use Thunderbolt on PC? Just, yeah, so it depends. Not every Thunderbolt audio interface has PC drivers, but it works the same way. Saudi Arabia, it's great. So question is, where am I at? I'm actually just outside Washington, D.C. area in the United States. I was in Dallas, Texas last night. Got back late last night. We're doing a clinic at Audio Dog in Dallas. So I'm a little tired. Okay, so see a question, is it possible to rearrange the faders in a console view? Currently, you'd still have to do it in the track list view. I'm not sure why it's not implemented yet, but hopefully, you know, give them something to do in maybe version 10. Okay, wait just in our minutes. We have more people logging in, so it's probably the biggest live audience we've had. 126 people, 127 people so far, and more people logged in. So I see a quick question, is there a way to copy fader level to sends? Is that dealing with Q mixes? If it's dealing with a Q mix, before you get started, you could right click in the control room and just say use the current mix levels. So that will take the current mix levels and build the cues on that. Then you could build a more me mix. Okay, so I'm seeing a question why Cubase has kind of different metering options than the computer operating system, and that could be just dealing with, you know, running the buffers lower. That may not tax the computer's operating system, but it may kind of tax the you know, the Cubase's operation with that. Okay, so we have south of France. So seeing just a quick question, where would people send feature requests? You know, one of the things that Steinberg has been doing the last few you know, releases is to do a survey. That's always good. You could always pass on feedback during the Google Hangouts as well. Okay, so I see just a quick question. Is it possible just to have a reverb on for monitoring and have it recorded dry? So if you do recording, all you'd have to do is just put that as an insert effect and it won't be recorded, but make sure that you have direct monitoring disabled, and then you could do that. All right, so I was saying Very Audio needs a vocal alignment function. Yeah, we just saw that implemented in Nuendo, so who knows if it'll find its way in Cubase. So that just came out in Nuendo a couple weeks ago in 8.1. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is going to be just a slightly different format than we normally do. We're just going to kind of go over a lot of the features found in Cubase 9.5. There's several comments. It's been just a great update already. Best update ever. We hear that a lot. So really well received. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the new features and functionality with it. So when we come over here, one of the things that we want to do is we kind of simplified and renamed and changed some of the nomenclature. So it used to be like your device menu is now going to be your studio menu. So instead of VST connections, it's audio connections. Your studio setup is where you could go and turn on all of your different, excuse me, all of your different audio interfaces and control surfaces you could access there. So kind of the nomenclature is a bit more clear. In version 9, we introduced the concept of more zones, so that if you had a particular, like a single display, like a large television, or you're working on a laptop, that you could actually work more effectively with a single display. So if you hit the tab key, you can navigate between the different tabs, and this would allow you to zoom the project window independently of the mix console, and you can see kind of the white frame as you hit the tab key. And as we've done this, we've also added some additional tabs in the right zone. So in the media, what we wanted to do is, now when we go to your instruments, you could at this point just see any of your Steinberg instruments, and if you wanted to add an instrument, you could just literally drag and drop and create your instrument track just like that. You could drag it directly onto the project window if you want. Some other new additions is the ability of just having your file browser. So we see a lot of people kind of going out to their, let me just switch this here real quick, going out to their operating system to find particular different, projects or presets or drum loops. Now you can just see all of your different functionality directly here. So your file structure, you could see every one of your files here. You could search for particular files as you do this. So if you wanted to just look in this particular folder or look in your documents and go to like Cubase projects, you could just kind of navigate and drag and drop audio files from one project directly into another project without having to open up a separate operating system level. When we did the actual mix console docked here in the lower zone, one of the things that that people wanted was a way to get kind of the control room and metering here as well. So a lot of people miss that you could have the control room volume dedicated directly here in your project window on the transport. But now we've added the control room functionality as a option directly here. So if I wanted to switch between different monitors at this point, I could, any of my audio interfaces, I could take my audio interface and any speakers that are connected to it, I could switch between my different speakers. But the most important thing with the control room is I could have a monitoring volume that's independent of the master volume here. So as I would hit play, we can now just kind of jump here. You can see that my gain structure here, my master fader, won't be adjusted as I adjust my monitoring level here. So now if you wanted to, even set like a known reference point, you could just hold down the Alt key and click right there and say, this is my known reference level for mixing. You could do that. So being able to switch between different speakers, monitor speakers, so if you have HS7s or JBLs or Eves, or if you want to do different down mix presets, we could just say, listen to it in mono or in stereo. And as we come here, we could also have your 4 Q mixes or headphone mixes. And this could be really handy because you could actually come over here and say, I just wanted the vocalist not to hear the click track in their headphone mix. So you could do settings for the 4 independent Q mixes directly here within a control room. So this gives you kind of your monitoring station, allows you to switch speakers to monitor different control rooms, different down mix presets. And what we've also incorporated is the new metering functionality. So we could look at full digital scale. So as we look at our metering, or if I want to go to DIN, so different metering standards, my EBU scale, British, Nordic, CAT system 20, 14, or 12. And you could also do different loudness metering. So you could do loudness units or LUFS or R128 metering. Excuse me. And again, just kind of all built in. So this functionality is just right here. Now, if you wanted to see kind of like your metering options and your control room volume, you could just kind of click right there and be able to adjust, have your master volume here, as well as see meterings. And if you wanted that to be a little longer or, wider or narrower, you could adjust that just that easily. So I guess they're calling this zoning 2.0. So again, more ability to find files that you have on your system, your control room, and metering built right in just like that. So we see a question why only 4 Qs in the control room. So we've been, I think we may see more in the future. So I've been kind of pushing for that for a long time to have more Qs in the control room. So maybe it'll come in a future update. Okay, so seeing question, is it possible to switch between the different monitors with keyboard shortcuts? So yeah, so as soon as you come directly here, you can go to the monitors, and at that point, when you get to your key commands, you could just look under your control room. And then you could actually just select the next monitor directly there. So, or you could switch to particular monitors just with different keyboard shortcuts or with different downmix presets. All right, now one of the things we also wanted to do was to have an interesting, way of snapping to the grid. So if we have our master timeline in bars and beats, we could see our different grid snapping options set to bar, to beat, or the quantize preset. But there's a new function called adapt to zoom. So as I wanted to go to particular parts, as I zoom in here, so let's say I'm zoomed at this level, and so now as soon as I go here, it'll just snap to bars. As I zoom in more, I can snap it to beats. Zoom in more, I can snap it to 16th notes. Zoom in again, 32nd notes, 64th notes, 128th notes. So depending on your level of zoom, you could actually just have that automatically carry directly over for your different zoom settings as well. So your snap options will be tied directly to how far you're zoomed in on the project window, which is super handy because you don't have to often switch between different choices there. And now, of course, you have your unlimited levels of undo, and we'll just zoom in here. All right. So that's a really handy function with that. So I'm just going to check out a couple comments. All right. Now, we've also seen some enhancements with automation. And I think that you still have to kind of put in 2 points. I see a question on that, like a return value. But one of the things that we wanted to do was, there's some ways of using some of the different drawing tools. But now if I have no automation whatsoever, I could just select a range, and then I could just add 4 points of automation using my range selection tool. And so if I wanted to just select this particular range here, I'll just turn my snap off and say I want this one word right here to be louder or softer, or I wanted this to be softer. So you could just kind of draw in your automation points. And as we do this, what's really handy is the ability to come right over here and just be able to tilt it also. So now switching directly to the object selection tool, anytime that I click between 2 automation points, I can just adjust those automation values just that easily. So I don't have to select the points. I just simply hover over 2 automation points, and I could bring up or down that particular region. Now, the one long-standing feature request that we've had is the ability to have different curve automation types. So if I wanted to do an automation here, and let's say I'll just bring this down. So let's say if I have a curve here, I could increase or decrease just by going to the option here at the top. So the top center, but if there's a change in the values, you'll get this little point in the center. And at that point, once you have, again, the object selection tool, you see this little dot in the center, and this will allow you to do your Bezier curves, just like that. So super easy. You don't have to hold down any modifier keys to do that. And let's say if I really like that particular curve and I wanted that repeated a number of different times, I could select that range of automation and just hit Control or Command D and just copy it over and over again throughout the project, like so. Now this also gets really interesting when you get into, let's say this particular track is now routed to a VCA. So I'm here on my saxophone track, and I'm going to add a VCA that's going to be, that this track will be sent to. So I'm going to go to my VCA fader for the selected channels. Okay, so I see my VCA fader directly below here. So now I could also just draw in my curves on my VCA fader as well. So if I wanted to do that, and we can see that these, we could see kind of the interaction here of the VCA on top of the existing automation. So If I wanted to just switch to like a line tool for my VCA fader, I can now just see what the VCA is, how that's impacting the original automation. And at this point, if I just wanted to go to the VCA fader, I could say combine the VCA fader with those different settings. And that way you could work that very effectively with your VCAs and your curves to do all sorts of really creative tasks with that. So a lot of new automation functionality that just really simplifies the process to make things faster and easier. And again, this is, one of the common user requests that we had. So they just implemented it. All right, just going to take a look at some of the comments and then we can move on. Just reading through a couple comments and we'll move on. All right, so it's just seeing a question on waveforms not appearing when you record. I think that's just a preference. So let's see if we can find it really quick. And let me just see if it's, but I think it's just a preference that's going to allow you to see it while you record the audio. So let me just see if it's in one of these event displays. Transport, but I think it's just a preference. I could take a look for it afterwards. All right, so we have some new automation functionality. Now, one of the things that people apparently couldn't live without was the ability of having 8 inserts or being limited to 8 inserts. So we doubled the number of inserts that are part of your system. So we have 16 available inserts. And as we work with this, and as you do research, you realize that people will want different numbers of pre and post fader. So you could have inserts that will affect the signal before the fader, or post fader where it's affecting it after the gain structure, the gain changes induced by the fader itself. So it used to be in previous versions of Cubase, inserts 1 through 6 were pre-fader and post-fader were 7 and 8. And so what we've done now is you could actually move this green line anywhere that you want. So if I want it to be 2 pre-fader, post-fader, and this is on, per track. So if I go to a different track, I could see different number of pre-faders and post-fader inserts just like this as well. So you could just move this particular line and determine how many pre and post-fader. I think you have to have 1 pre-fader and at least 1 post-fader. But you can dynamically change those as you see fit. We've also updated some of the plugins. So let's say if I wanted to come here, so we have the Magneto, which is the analog tape saturation plugin. This will be just a GUI overhaul, so just a graphic user interface. The tube compressor has been updated, and it's kind of interesting because I sent this over to one of my mastering engineer friends who has every piece of outboard gear imaginable. This is his absolute favorite tube compressor. And you have the character knob that's added. So you could get kind of different harmonic content with this, but this is a very special plugin. On the vintage compressor, you now have a mix function. So as you click here, we can now just have different, functionality for where you could basically do a parallel signal path if you wanted to simulate that. The standard compressor also has your dry mix here and a new high threshold mode. So if you want to do like a 20:1 ratio, you could do that quite easily there. So some new enhancements with the plugin. So new GUI on Magneto, as well as new functionality in the tube compressor, the vintage compressor, and the standard compressor as well. So we'll go ahead and I'll take a look at some of the comments. So just seeing a comment for like laggy Mac GUI. So most of the comments that we've seen have been very favorable, that it's been dramatically improved. So people kind of running the Retina display Macs and iMacs have seen the comments I've seen online have been just a great performance increase, and people have been very happy with the new performance on Macs. So we're saying, I see a comment about why is Cubase not trying to save all your presets to an online like cloud-based system. So a lot of people, I think it'd be nice if they could do that perhaps with the VST Transit functionality. But a lot of people are just kind of using the profile manager for that and being able to store a lot of their own presets as one profile file so that they could just simply access that and move it to any other system easily on like a thumb drive or something like that. Okay, so I was seeing trying to change the background color editor. So I personally like when I do just from Nick. So when I'm doing like different MIDI functionality, I like to see my background editor for to be brighter, and this is changed in this particular version. So if you go to your preferences, and then go to, I think if we go to user interface, and this time when we go to our custom colors, we can now see the editor area background. So if you just kind of click there, you can change the background color for the editor. So give that a try, Nick, and see if that does a trick for you. Okay, so I'm seeing just a question on bringing back like some preferences and being able to have like your media bay from like a Cubase version 9. So there are preference files that you can just manually copy over. So most of the time it will automatically carry those over. So it did on 5 of my computers. But if not, you can do a search for where the user preferences are, and there's a mediabay.db file. And then you could just manually copy that from Cubase 9 folder to your Cubase 9.5. All right, so we had a question on showing the background waveform in the automation lane, and if someone could show how to do that. So when we come here, that's just in the automation preferences. So when you go to F6 and then click in the lower left-hand corner, and then you could say show data on tracks. And once that's turned on, you could then see the actual audio waveform in the automation tracks. All right, so let's take a look at some of the direct offline processing functionality. So just open up different project. So let's say if I wanted to do something that was maybe a little more sound designy, and I wanted to do some creative processing. And a lot of people will tend not to use a lot of destructive or what's deemed as destructive editing for fear that they won't be able to get something back. So let's say if I wanted to just play back this file here. Okay, so I'm going to just take this particular range here, and then we could hit the F7 key, or from your audio menu, go directly to direct offline processing. So at this point, I could just go to a process. So let's say I wanted to do a fade in on that particular region. So I could see that the waveform has now been updated. I wanted to do a stereo flip, making my left channel my right and my right channel my left. I wanted to reverse the audio. I wanted to come here. So as I do this, it's actually just processing the audio file itself. So if I want to add, 3.2 dB to the audio file, we could just do stuff like that, and the audio is going to be just processed that easily. So now if I want to do something even a little more creative, I could now just say, let's just take this, and I want to do like pitch shift. So we could do kind of a static transpose, and if you wanted to preview a particular file or process, you could just click on the play button here and preview it before it's actually processed. But in the pitch shift, you could also just say I wanted to do like an octave and have that automatically process. So now I can have the pitch shift go up an octave as it fades out. But let's say now what this does is it processes you have the original file, and it processes kind of a copy of that file. So if I wanted to just say I wanted to take out the reverse of that, I could listen to it and just temporarily bypass the reverse. Or let's turn it back on, and now it's automatically been applied. If I wanted to change the order, and I could do this like 10 minutes later or 10 years later, you could just go back and change all those particular functions. Or you could say, I just want to remove step 4 without affecting 1, 2, 3, and 5. So you could do this in kind of a non-linear fashion. And if I wanted to make all these changes permanent, you could just right click and say make all permanent. If I wanted to delete all of those, I can now just delete all the files. And again, that's even after saving, opening up the project, handing it off to someone else. If I wanted to listen to, I could select a file here. And let's say I wanted to just process that through like a delay of some kind. So we'll come here, I'll do a ping pong delay. And as we do this, we also have some functions, and you may notice that the length of this particular piece will change because we could add, we could extend the process range in milliseconds, or we could actually do the tail in milliseconds. So at this point, I could just say, as we do our delay, we can see that that part will just automatically elongate to accommodate the tail. So if I wanted more of a tail, we could do that, or I could just say, let's delete that function. Now, as we're doing this, we also have the auto apply button turned on. So if I wanted to take a guitar part here that's dry, I could just go to my distortion and we'll go to our VST amp rack. And as we do this, we'll just say, okay, we'll have that. And now we could preview it through that plugin without actually applying it. So I could So if I wanted to now apply that VST amp rack preset, I could now just click apply and we can see the waveform automatically change. And let's say if I want to do kind of a guitar pedal friendly EQ, I could just come over here. We'll go to like a graphic EQ. We could audition. And again, apply. And let's say if I just put on my auto apply here and just say, okay, I just want it again to run it through like a flanger. And again, at this point, I could just come right over here, audition that. And it's bypass the EQ pedal. So being that you can do this so incredibly fast, you could just simply process everything super quick. So let's say I just wanted to delete all the functionality here, but let's say I just want to take like all of my drum tracks in a particular session here. So let's say I have a number of drums. So I could select all my drums here, and let's say I just want to run it through a magneto plugin. So I could just come here if I want that tape saturation. At this point, I could just say, okay, I want that. We'll change the output. Let's put a little more high end on it. And now it's just processed. Anytime I make a little tweak, it's just processed all 13 of those files. So now I could play back. And if I bypassed it or deleted that function, and you could also just undo and redo that functionality as well. So let's say if I wanted to come here, let's run it through our magneto. And as we do this, so we can see how many of the files are being processed. And let's say on the bottom snare mic, I just wanted to do a quick phase reverse on that one. So this way, when I select one file, this has magneto. I go to this one, this has magneto and a phase reverse. And at this point, at any time, you could just say, you could select all your files in your project and just come right over here, delete all, and you're right back to where you were. So while a lot of people typically didn't work this way because it was very destructive and you couldn't undo it with the direct offline processing, you do this very quickly. And again, without kind of being stuck down a rabbit hole where you committed to something that you can't undo. So it's very, very easy to do that with the direct offline processing. So great functionality with that. I saw one comment just a little bit earlier about, finding VST plugins. So if you go to the Studio tab, and this is kind of probably the same in Elements, I believe the question was. But at this point, we could see all of your different plugins here. And if you have like VST2 plugins, if you go to the settings here, in the lower left-hand corner, you could define the path where your VST plugins are installed on your system. So let me just go ahead and read through a couple comments, and then we'll move on. right, just reading through some of the comments here. Just give me a second. All right, so I'm just saying a couple comments. So currently, with the offline processing, you don't have the ability to save plugin change, and that's something that was just implemented in Nuendo. So we may see it kind of come over to Cubase. So I think they understand the need for that. I'm not sure if that will be deemed something that will be Nuendo specific or not, but the capability is currently there in Nuendo. Right, so just saying a quick question about maybe moving the left and right locators around. So, you can just grab this with a hand, but if you wanted to go to the transport menu at this point, I believe if you just go to the locators, you could exchange the left and right locators. And what's an interesting, cool little trick, if you have the cycle record on, this will actually skip that range. So if you're playing, if you want to see what it was like to skip a particular range, you could just do that when the left and right locators are reversed. So question, will the new offline processing put a load on CPU if it's not applied? Yeah, it'll just basically be running it in real time. But what you could do is just simply kind of tweak it, and then at that point, just when you're happy with it, just apply it if you're afraid of running out of CPU resources. So you kind of have a way of kind of working, destructively and choosing it, or you could just run the plugins in real time in the mix console. Either way. All right, so let's go ahead to one of our next new themes that we have, and that's with the metronome. So the metronome in Cubase was a little dated, and it's pretty significantly updated in 9.5. So it's making a lot of film composers very happy with some very slick functionality. So let's say most of us are pretty familiar with our standard click track sound that we have here. Now, if we wanted to change the click track sound easily, we could go to the metronome setup, and this has been kind of revamped. So you could choose where you want MIDI click, audio click, but you could also just go to click sounds. Here you could set your MIDI click, your velocity. You could also click on use custom sounds. So if you want to have like claves, or like wood blocks, mechanical sounds. And if you want kind of like a classic Yuri click, you can load up vintage spike. Or let's say wood block. So really easy to change, and if you wanted to load in your own presets, you could just kind of when you go to the custom sounds, if you load this up, you can just direct it directly to a wave file. And at that point, you could just have access to any audio file that's on your system. Now, one of the things that's really cool about this is, let's say if you have a signature track, we could actually go to different click patterns. So I could see this directly from when I select the event here. I can see it in the info line, or if you go to the metronome settings here at the bottom, you could see your click pattern. So if you double click just on this part, you could open up click pattern editor. So if you want to have like 4 different pitches, or let's say a click on 1, 3, and 4, but not beat 2. Or let's say if you wanted to do quintuplets, but you're still in 4/4 time, but you wanted the click to be in quintuplets. You can set the number of clicks to 5, or sextuplets, or septuplets. Or if you want to do 8. Now you could also have different user patterns. So you could have a default, or you could have half tempo. So if you're doing something like in cut time, again, you could just click here, or if you want it to be double tempo. And if you wanted to kind of modify it, because this is easier for the drummer to get the feel for it, you could do stuff like that. Now, as soon as we're here, we could also just say, when we go to the transport, we'll go to our metronome setup. And as we go to the metronome setup, there's also different click pattern editors. So we could say, like when I go to 12/8, I wanted to have another click pattern, and you could actually create your own pattern. So if I wanted 3, I want it subdivided kind of in triplets like that. You could just come over here and give it a name and be able to access that particular pattern. So you could create your own library of different click pattern presets. Now this also gets very interesting when dealing with like complex time signatures. So let's say we're currently in 7/8. So I'm going to select this particular pattern here, and we listen to our click in 7/8. But let's say if I wanted it to be like 2 + 5, or 3 + 4. Now, a really interesting feature is if you right click on the timeline here, you could actually use the metronome click pattern level for grid line emphasis. So you see that now I'm in 7/8. I could see 3 + 4 with the grid line emphasis here. So if I wanted to just make this 4 + 3, or 2 + 2 + 3, you could do stuff like that, or 2 + 5. So if I wanted to have a 2 + 5 click, and then another 7/8, which is 4 + 3, you could have different click tracks for the same time signature for different feels. So here we'll have 2 + 5, and then 4 + 3. And sometimes you may run into situations where, especially if you're doing something in 12/8, let's say if your click track now kind of sounds like this, and all of a sudden I'll just take it out of cycle mode here. So we're in 12/8. But let's say we have a very fast tempo. So let's say we're at 188 beats a minute, and we have something that's like this. Or let's do just like another division here. So I will just make this 12/8. And sometimes to the musician that could sound very like a machine gun going off in their head. So here again, you could just say, let's just make the click pattern just like this, where the musician can subdivide. So at different tempos, you could have different pulses where the musicians can do their own subdivisions. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do was also, if you click on your signature track, you can now render the MIDI click between the locators. So you can have your MIDI click, but what else you could do that's very handy is just to be able to render your audio click between the locators. And now your metronome track has now been rendered directly as an audio file in your system. Just that easy to be able to have your files and be able to hand it off to other musicians or other composers you're working with, and have your click track just as a normal audio file. So a lot of flexibility with your click tracks in Cubase. I just read through a couple of comments. All right, so just seeing a comment just on freezing multiple tracks. So, you could do this kind of with the built-in, render in place. So it's not freezing necessarily, but you kind of can get the same functionality. So let's say if I just go to a particular track here. So, you don't necessarily have to do just a straight rendering. So let's just find a couple. Or have some keyboard parts, I think. So if I wanted to take, multiple keyboard parts here, I could just take those particular tracks, and then if you wanted to just render in place, you could just do it like that and then turn that directly into audio without having to freeze each individual track. So check out some of the different rendering options if you wanted to do that. And you don't have to freeze multiple tracks, but you get the same result, and it actually just shows up directly on your project window to be edited, and your parts can be muted automatically. So seeing just a couple comments, just that you're not getting the metronome out. So make sure that the metronome is turned on, and that's just like hitting the C key for click. If you go to under the studio menu to your audio connections, depending on your outputs here, you could turn on the click for particular outputs, or you could do it inside of the control room and have the click enabled there. So setting the, one of those three methods should allow you to hear the click track. Just reading through a couple comments. Sorry, there's a lot of comments coming in. Okay, so I'm seeing just a question on quantizing earlier or later to the beat. So you could actually select notes that are, if you go into the logical editor, you could set to choose a particular, if a note is X number of ticks ahead of the beat, to select that and then quantize it. So nothing has really changed with that, but you could do that already. Okay, so I'm getting questions like which Mac system is this running on? This is just running on just a couple month old Power Mac or MacBook Pro. So, all right, let's show a couple other things that we could do. So, as we're working with this, let's say if I just wanted to kind of play back and I wanted to easily navigate between different areas in the program. It used to be that you could click here in the top timeline to navigate, and there's an option to click in an empty space to navigate. But now if you hold down the Alt and Shift key and click anywhere with the object selection tool, you could just play back immediately from that particular area. Now, one of the other things that was added was, and we see some questions on this going into some of the other instruments. And one of the new instruments that comes included with Cubase is Flux. And Flux will work inside of Hallion Sonic SE. It'll work inside of Hallion Sonic 3 or Hallion. And Flux is a wavetable synthesizer. So if you wanted to kind of come over here, do really interesting sounds, and you could come over here, and again you can go through and select different wavetables. If you wanted to, you could adjust your modulation matrix, arpeggiation. You could also have all your filters, your quick controls. So just here I could run inside of my Hallion Sonic or Hallion Sonic SE that comes with Cubase. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is a new sample, the new sample track functionality. So when I wanted to come here, let's say if I have a sample track open, I just have a note recorded, and I just have a MIDI track that's being sent directly to my sample track. So at this point, all I had to do, I could drag a MIDI part that's routed to a virtual instrument, and now it's going to just automatically render that as an audio file. So now I can play back this sample track. So any virtual instrument, you could just kind of come over here, run through different filters. So again, just dragging and dropping any virtual instrument part directly into the sampler track is very easy to do. But let's say I've also done some different like filter sweeps. I can come directly here, say, okay, I wanted that as an option, but I wanted to have a curve option for that. And then you could just easily just kind of toggle back and forth between an A and B setting directly within the system like that. So some nice enhancements to the sampler track, being able to drag and drop any virtual instrument MIDI part directly right in and have it rendered. Now, one of the more significant things that's a bit under the hood is how when you go to your studio setup, when you go to the VST audio system, you have different options on if you want it to be in a 32-bit floating point precision or 64-bit floating precision. So it's a double precision audio engine that's been incorporated. So it will take just slightly more CPU for the calculations. And for this, I think you're going to need VST3 plugins that are going to be able to support the 64-bit double precision floating point calculations. And we could actually determine that just by going, if you click on this little icon here, you can show all the plugins that are working in 64-bit floating point precision. So pretty much all the included plugins are functioning. Now, there's obviously a lot of different concern with, between 32-bit and 64-bit plugins, and that deals with memory addressing. So like older 32-bit plugins can only address like 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 64-bit plugins can address more RAM. But the floating point audio engine is just how the math that goes on internally, so that you could actually as you start adding effects and doing mixing and automation, that all those the engine for all that engineering and the math that's going on is now twice as precise. Now, it may not be super apparent on every type of mix track, but when I first got a version to play with, I took the same exact project and I loaded the program in 32-bit. I exported the file. I opened up the same project, exported it in the 64-bit floating point engine, and I sent it to a mastering engineer friend of mine. And his comment was, I just sent him 2 audio files. Like, what's the difference? Give me your impressions of these files. And he was like, this one seems more polished to me. It's pretty subtle, but it's those subtle things that can make a difference with large projects. And as you're summing multiple tracks and tons of different effects processors, at that point it will improve the audio quality, but you could try it and just easily switch back and forth between to see the results for yourself. But it is now a brand new double precision audio engine, and you could have that level of control. So, if you think about some of the new stuff, and again, these are all requests that our users have sent to us, wanting to have the control room functionality docked, wanting to have more flexible curves, wanting to have easier automation, wanting sampler track improvements, wanting a better metronome, wanting more extensive offline processing capability. So these things that our customers have asked for, Steinberg has actually delivered. And again, we see performance improvements throughout the entire system as well. We see, the double precision audio engine. So all these things really kind of make up for a great new 9.5 version of Cubase. We'll see if there's any last minute questions before we wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for coming online. We'll be doing another Google Hangout early in December. And that will be more of the traditional Q&A. And if you wanted to submit questions in advance, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.net. And that way you could actually have kind of particular questions answered. The intention of this Hangout is really to kind of go over the new features in 9.5 in a little more detail. But if that makes sense, I hope everyone's learned a couple things. I'll see if there's a couple last minute comments before we wrap up. All right, so I see a question if there's a trial version currently available. Not yet. They usually kind of wait a little bit. I also see a question, will there be a maintenance version coming soon? I'm sure that, they're working on one as we speak. And we can see kind of usually Steinberg is pretty responsive with that. I also see a question about being able to export into the audio into a video. That functionality is not there with a new video engine currently, but they are aware of it and working on it as we speak. I see a question, is the upgrade fee kind of a subscription? No. You could pay for the upgrade if you want, but nothing's going to time out, so it's not a subscription model. Our users have told us that they don't want a subscription model. So it is just a one-time payment for the upgrade. And I believe from 9 to 9.5, it's $59, or it could be different depending what country you're in. You could check with the Steinberg online shop. So see if someone asks, we could kind of show a big project. So this project, and this is mostly included plugins, but it's, let me see how many tracks it is. 78 tracks. With all the virtual instruments going on. So this is where the CPU performance is. And it's everything mixed in the box, nothing really rendered. So just so you get kind of an idea. See a question on the integration with the soft tube controller. So we'll probably see that in January. I think we're just kind of waiting for an update from Softtube on that, but you'll be able to use that as an integrated control surface directly in Cubase. So might be January, February-ish, but it's we're just kind of waiting for an upgrade from Softtube, but that's something else that we're doing as well. So I see a question on what discounts are available for Black Friday. So the version is just so new. I'm not sure if they're doing Black Friday discounts on it, just because it is completely brand new. I also see a comment about warping multiple tracks. That's not implemented currently. But that is a feature request that they've gotten numerous times, so they're aware of it. And if there's another survey, make sure that you mention that. That was one of the topics in the survey as well earlier. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us online. And again, we usually do these Hangouts like twice a month. This is kind of a special overview of Cubase 9.5. But if you have questions in general, please send them to clubcubase@steinberg.net. We hope everyone's learned a couple tips and tricks. I think it's a great new update. There's a lot of great functionality that can really speed up your workflow. So I think that if you guys upgrade to the 9.5, that you're really going to like it, and just gives a lot of great options. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the Hangout. Thanks everyone for participating throughout the world. It's always fascinating for me to be able to talk to so many people from like 5 continents. from my office. So I appreciate everyone logging in. Hope you guys liked it. And again, we do these a couple times a month, and we'll get back to you on the next one. Should be kind of early December-ish. I'll just take one last minute scan of some comments, and then we'll wrap up. See, just a quick comment from George Strawn that I didn't answer his question, so if you want to ask it again, please feel free just to type it in. I'll see if I can wait a minute, type it in. Sorry I missed it. There's a lot of comments going by. So we had a comment, how do we announce the dates for the next clinics? It's usually a Facebook event that's going to be announced. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, I believe you'll get notified. So if you subscribe to youtube.com/Cubase, that you'll be notified when we're doing Hangouts as well. So I see George's question, do you need to use a new code for the Zoom R8? I don't think so. So if you have like the Cubase LE that comes with it, so I'm not sure if you have the full Cubase, but I think it's kind of independent of the Zoom hardware. I see a comment, is it possible to find sends and Q sends as pre by default? I know a lot of people will just do that in a template, but I don't think there's a way of doing it by default. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everyone, so much for doing a Hangout. If you're in the United States, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. And if you're outside the U.S., you can hope the rest of the week is a great week for you guys, and enjoy the holiday season coming up. And we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you very much.